Entonces, buenos días. Good morning to everyone. Good evening to our colleague Keiko, who's joining from Japan. Welcome to this event where we are launching a fantastic report on, it's a global assessment of building codes that has been done by the World Bank with the Inter-American Development Bank together. And so I'm excited to be here today with all of you so that we can learn a bit more about the work, its implications, to build a more effective risk reduction, especially now with the impacts of climate change globally, and then hear a bit more about implications, especially for the Latin American and Caribbean region. So to kick things off, I'd like to invite, we have opening remarks from two colleagues, both the World Bank and the IADB. So let's start Ole Nielsen, who is practice manager for our global Disaster and Climate Risk Management Unit, as well as the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery here at the World Bank. Niels?
Thanks, Zoe. And good morning, everyone. Good evening, Keiko. Thanks for joining us. It's exciting that about 40 people are connected to hear more about a report on building codes. It does sound a bit academic and dry, maybe, but it is a very important piece of economic development, and maybe we'll dig a bit into that in a moment. My name is Niels Holm Nielsen. I manage a global unit at the World Bank we try to focus on improving disaster and climate risk management through development finance. We have a donor side that is known as the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery. We have funded on our side of the equation the work going into this report from that donor side. We will be launching today this report titled A Global Assessment of Building Codes, as Zoe mentioned. We've done this in partnership with IDB. This, I think, is quite exciting. I don't think it's as easy to do knowledge pieces together across MDBs as it probably should be. Certainly, we're not seeing it all that frequently. I think there's a big potential to do more. I'm super excited that here we have figured out how to take advantage of such potential and actually get it done. We're especially pleased to welcome Juan Pablo Bonilla, and I think Ginés Suarez and Maria Alejandra also connected, the whole IDB team that are connected, of course. Thank you for collaborating with us and bearing with us. I'm sure you had to bear with us on some things because we're certainly not easy to work with. Within my unit, we try to drive specific knowledge. We organize across a number of technically specific lines of work related to disaster risk reduction. Building regulations is one of these. This team led by Keiko and Anna has been leading the work on our side for this particular product. We're launching today that builds on individual pieces, one done by the World Bank and another one by the IDB in previous years. And we figured out that together we could make some adjustments, some enhancements, and put out a product that is globally relevant in a more meaningful way than any of our individual pieces were on their own. I think it's sitting with a DRR hat, then we always argue that building codes save lives, that building codes is more important now than ever because the changing climate, the increased intensity of hazards, all of that I certainly believe in. I've worked on it for 20 some years and I've seen a lot to make sure that absolutely I believe in that. But I do think there's another angle on building codes that we're less good at articulating and connecting. And that is that building codes are one of the foundation pieces of functioning mortgage markets. And mortgage markets are one of the foundation pieces for economies and people to save. To saving their assets. And this becomes key pieces of economic development. And it's not that hard to see from a pure logical point of view. A code gives a sign to the market that refers to the quality of the asset. And the quality of the asset, of course, has an impact of the value of the asset. This really is important because the better we become at understanding and talking about that in the context of the importance of saving lives, the broader political environment and stakeholders it may be possible to involve in changing some of these building codes. I think this is particularly relevant in Latin America. That's primarily mid-income, upper mid-income countries where there's a larger share of the housing market that does get close to or already is financed with mortgages. But it is relevant across the world to some extent and to a growing extent. This is key for the whole focus on economic development and in our institution now jobs creation in a broader sense. So I just wanted to add that piece in because I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about saving lives, which is what drive our immediate focus on the building codes and will continue to drive the immediate focus on the building codes. But I think I will stop there. Zoe will be chairing our event. But before we go back to Zoe, I would like to invite Juan Pablo Bonilla from the IDB. He's IDB's Manager for Climate Change Sustainable Development Sector, to say a few words. Juan Pablo.
Thank you, Niels. Are you listening well?
Perfectly.
No, thank you very much to you and to all the team from the World Bank. I just wanted to say thank you for the joint work with the Global Facility of Disaster Risk Reduction and the World Bank team for this co-publication and about building codes. My words are very easy. I agree with everything you just said. But I wanted to emphasize I'm a civil engineer by training. So I can just say how happy I am to see this publication. Building codes are a very valuable tool for reducing disaster risk. And as you said, Niels, community vulnerability. IDB has been working in the region, in all the 26 countries, assessing institutional, financial, regulations related to resiliency. I'm very happy to see that the publication includes cases of countries like Chile, Colombia, Salvador, Mexico, and Peru. And I think the conclusions of the assessment are very relevant to enhance technical capabilities of all the professionals involved in construction and design. I think foster collaboration, not only among public entities, but private sector and academia is key, but also the allocation of key resources for the implementation, monitoring, and future updates. I think this has to be a dynamic process to also adjust everyday building codes to resiliency and as you said, Niels, to better development. And I just wanted to share, I was talking to Niels, IDB is creating the new unit of disaster risk management to work together with climate change, with biodiversity and nature. I'm here right now in the OECD local meeting in Barranquilla in Colombia about local governments and cities. And yesterday, Niels, I was talking about the importance of resilience. And I mentioned the publication. I didn't launch anything between but I mentioned that the collaboration among different entities like you to work together in the region to really bring disaster risk management building codes since the beginning, I think is going to be key. And related to that, IDB recently launched at the annual meeting of the IDB in Chile, a new regional impact program is called Ready and Resilient Americas. The first pillar of this program is data for resiliency. And we're developing a new, and Alejandra will explain better what that is the risk hub envisioned as a useful tool to support risk identification for LAC. But we want this to be a joint effort. I think this is one of the issues that we can collaborate, see what we're doing together in the region to have that platform to better data for the countries. And I think by leveraging the risk hub, we can enhance our common ability to identify and address vulnerabilities. So thanks again to both teams. I think it has been a great example of collaboration and looking forward to continue working together.
Great. No, thank you both, Niels, Juan Pablo, for the opening remarks. Maybe before we dive into the more technical discussion, I just want to give a couple quick announcements. So first, we will have presentations primarily in English, but also some in Spanish. So there is interpretation available through Zoom. So if you go to the bottom of your screen, there's like a little globe icon that you can click on. And if you prefer English, Spanish, you can select. So we also have translation happening. That's one. Second, I will do my best as moderator to save some time at the end for question and answers from the audience. So please go ahead and drop any questions, type in anything, English or Spanish, no importa. You can go ahead and put it in the chat, and then we'll go through at the end to the panel and answer any questions you may have. Also, this is being recorded, so if you have colleagues or friends or counterparts who couldn't make it today, feel free to share, as well as, of course, the report. So help us with the dissemination, please. So having said that, I'd now like to hand over to our colleagues, Ana Campos Garcia, who is Lead Disaster Risk Management Specialist, as well as Keiko Sakoda, Senior Disaster Risk Management Specialist, both here at the World Bank, who will give us a flavor of the new report, some of the highlights and key takeaways.
So thank you very much, Zoe, and it's a pleasure to be here sharing with you the result of more than a year and a half of work and intensive collaboration with the Inter-American Development Bank. We are very proud of this assessment because we understand it's one of the few intents of doing a global assessment on the status on building codes. And I want to take the opportunity to thank also the collaboration and the support from the government of Japan for financing this publication. Next, please. So as we all look forward to the urbanization process, and we know that 70% of the population is estimated to be urban and expected to be living in cities by 2050, that will imply the development of a lot of new buildings and new constructions. So there is a unique opportunity to influence the quality and the resilience of those new constructions. But also, as we are facing a lot of challenges with increasing frequency and intensity of the hazard, especially exacerbated by climate change, we need to also take the opportunity to adapt and reuse and safeguard the existing buildings to protect and really make sure that those buildings serve the purposes for what they were built. So in that sense, as it was mentioned by Juan Pablo and Niels, this is not only important because it saves lives, but also it's important because it will provide the safety, resilience, and inclusive opportunity for the communities to be able to use and to work in a very safe built environment. Next, please. As also it was mentioned, this builds on the work that was done in 2023 by the GFDRR on an assessment on the Africa status of the building codes. We assessed more than 46 countries in the sub-Saharan Africa. And once we launched that report, we were asked, why not developing a global report? So we started assessing what was around there. And we found that the Inter-American Development Bank had done a very nice also study for the building codes in Latin America. So we decided if we wanted to go globally that we will partner with them on this development. We integrated the methodology to do a deeper assessment in some of the countries that were already covered by the report of the Inter-American Development Bank. And also, I want to say that this complements also an initiative done by our colleagues from Be Ready on the global landscape of building energy regulations that has done an analysis in more than 88 countries and cities on the status of building and energy regulations. So if you want to have an overall view of the situation in sub-Saharan Africa, in Latin America, and in energy regulations, you can go in addition to the report that we are launching today to those reports. The scope of trying to cover globally a lot of variables was very challenging. So we decided to take a small sample of 22 countries to try to see the status of the building codes and have a very good regional representation. So we select some of those countries based on the economical losses generated by seismic events, by wind events or tropical cyclones and tropical storms, and try to have a representation of the different regions where we work as a World Bank across the globe. And as it was mentioned, we focus in 5 countries in Latin America: Chile, Colombia, Salvador, Mexico, and Peru, out of within those 22 countries. Next, please. So how was the assessment conducted? So our main priority was structural safety and resilience. So we selected more than 63 topics or variables to be assessed related with the topic of structural safety and resilience. We cover green buildings and universal accessibility too, in a more general sense with a lower level of detail, but also building codes are not effective if we don't have a good implementation mechanism. So also we cover some assessments related with the implementation capacity and the implementation practices across these 22 countries. To conduct the study, you can imagine building codes are not only relying in one document, normally are several documents within one country, and also they are in the local languages. So we needed technical experts familiar with the context at the local level and familiar with the local languages to be able to interpret some of those building codes. And we had a global team that was kind of coordinating and defining the methodology and consolidating the process. So more than 25 experts across the world. And we identify the key questions of what we wanted to do by each topic in a binary way. Yes or no? Does the code have that some elements related with this topic, or does it not have it? So we were not evaluating the comprehensiveness or the quality because it was very difficult to compare, but at least if the codes were containing some of those variables that we wanted to assess. Next, please. So in that regard, I mean, this is a big table summarizing all the results. You will be able to see it in the book. And my colleague now, Keiko Sakoda, will go into further details, but I just wanted to give you an overall picture. In terms of safety and resilience, that's where we found the larger coverage. And because building codes were born to cover seismic events, cyclones and winds and fire safety. So that's why we have the larger level of development in terms of those variables. But we can say that Colombia, Mexico, Chile were among the most developed countries, not only Latin America, but across the globe. And in that sense, there is a lot of experience in Latin America that can be shared with other regions. But also, regardless of the advances that we have seen, there is still some gaps on how we are addressing challenges like floods and extreme heat, for example, where there is still room for improvement and development. So my colleague Keiko will go through some of the findings. It's a lot of information in the document, but I think some of the quick findings. So over to Keiko.
Thank you, Ana. Thank you, Ana. Yeah, so I'll go through a very quick summary of key findings according to the topics that we covered. The first topic is seismic and wind provisions. Seismic and wind events are main hazards that typically or traditionally addressed in the building codes through the design provisions to ensure safety and also minimize damages. In fact, many countries we studied advanced provisions in this area. However, there is still like big gap that could be filled. For example, the information like the seismic map and hazard maps are not updated frequently. Although data and technology have made huge advancement over the past decades. So periodic review and update of hazard maps are quite critical because we experience change in climate, frequency, and intensity of extreme events, and also the level of exposure. And reflecting updated hazard information into building codes make the risk reduction strategy more context-specific and also cost-efficient. Another important aspect is improving the code provisions to apply appropriate safety level for different building types. For example, although all countries that we studied had some level of seismic design provisions, but primarily focusing on limiting loss of life and also ensuring the structural integrity, which is commonly referred as life safety performance level, and which is important. However, like important buildings like hospitals and schools, they should be designed for higher safety level to continue providing life-saving critical services and also continue functioning to host communities as evacuation shelters during disasters without much damages. So to enable this, we need more kind of robust design provisions for both structural and non-structural components of buildings. But what we found was many cases that provisions for non-structural components were lacking. Lastly, many countries benefited from benefited from international and regional codes and standards as a reference documents. However, adopting a different set of codes and standards without appropriate localization effort make the overall guidance information rather confusing or conflicting or even incomplete. So it's very important to ensure consistency of code provisions across the whole set of building regulatory document to enable the professional community to better comply with the code requirements. So now we can move to the climate hazards. The next slide, please. So this is a rather kind of evolving topic for the building codes. So as I mentioned, seismic and wind are typical hazard addressed in the building code traditionally. But for example, floods are kind of emerging topic for the building code because flood used to be or traditionally managed through the land use planning. However, some locations previously safe for flood are not safe anymore for the flood because of unregulated development or rapid urbanization and also changing climate. So it's becoming quite important for building code to provide appropriate design guidance for buildings against floods. And extreme heat is also another newly recognized hazard in the building codes. Provision of shadings and natural ventilation, use of reflective roofs and walls. These kind of provisions are can be better integrated in building codes in combination with green building requirements. Next slide, please. So related to the green building, so we also look into the green building and also universal accessibility provisions. As Anna mentions, the universal accessibility was a topic where we only analyze at very high level. So if you see the report, you see a kind of quite good coverage of universal accessibility provisions in most countries. However, the fundamental challenge of this is mostly these are like voluntary mechanism, not mandatory. And same situation for the green building. Mostly it's voluntary and only requirements sometimes for the public buildings or large buildings which are used by the general public. So for example, Colombia and Mexico have very well developed green building code. However, this is applicable only for the public buildings. So there's still room for for expansion for the private sector buildings. But since this topic is quite highly demanded and also quite popular topic, hopefully the market will take up and also the transition to the mandatory requirement will be happening over the years. And to support that kind of transition, green building certification system like LEED, BREEAM, or EDGE of the IFC, these are quite useful tools to further nudge the market. The next, I'm going to talk about the small buildings. So globally, roughly 60 to 70% of the global overall building stocks are estimated as small-scale residential buildings. And particularly in low and middle income countries, these small-scale buildings are just often source of the high vulnerability because of the lack of the engineering support, use of substandard materials, or unsupervised construction works. So although it is very important to provide safe construction guidance for these kind of small buildings and typically, source of the vulnerability, but our report found that only half of the studied country had the specific dedicated provision for these kind of small scale buildings. But the good news is LAC is a champion of this topic. Although our report only highlighted 2 countries, Colombia and El Salvador, had the simplified provisions. But this is only because we counted the countries where official adaptation or official integration of these kind of provisions into the building code. So, but, so we actually know that we are aware that, Chile, Mexico, Peru, and other LAC countries have very good housing reconstruction guide or housing construction guide for quite many years. So we consider LAC as a champion of this topic, and then definitely there is a kind of chance to expand or share the knowledge of the LAC with the rest of the region. And related to the small scale buildings, there are also like some countries integrating vernacular construction provisions, which are adapted for the local climate and hazard. And integrating this kind of, improvement provisions for vernacular type of building is quite good approach to promote safe construction practice using local materials and local construction techniques. The next slide, I'm going to talk about the existing buildings. As Anna also mentioned earlier, existing buildings is quite important because particularly in low and middle income countries where resources are quite scarce, retrofitting and rehabilitation of buildings is quite helpful to sustain the life of buildings longer. And of course, this is also an important topic when it comes to the reconstruction after the disaster happened. But many countries realized after the disaster, like, oh, we don't have actually the provision for the building assessment and also retrofitting and rehabilitation. So our study actually found that only 50% of the 22 countries have provisions related to the existing structure or structure assessment, retrofitting, and rehabilitation. But integrating provision for this kind of existing buildings and also fostering the professional capacity in assessing building and also retrofitting and rehabilitating building before something happened could be a quite strong ex-ante risk reduction measure. Yeah. And then the next slide, I'm going to talk about the last point about the code development and implementation aspect. As also Anna highlighted earlier, the building code adjusts paper if it is not implemented. So well-functioning processes and resources needed to be in place to ensure good compliance. And it is really fundamental to have a clear processes and also role and responsibility for code development, update, and also the enforcement. The process can be, of course, incremental. It cannot be happening overnight. And because it required time to foster capacity of the government to control the buildings and also for the private sector to comply with the code. And here, the partnership is the key to particularly to bolster the capacity of local government, often the front line of the code compliance activity. They're often in charge of building approval processes, but they're also equally overwhelmed by the volume of the requests coming every day. So Colombia is a great example, which has a unique approach to leverage the private sector capacity to strengthen the local government capacity for the effective building control. They introduced in 1995, 25 years ago, they introduced a position called urban curator. And these people are acting on behalf of the public administration, and they are responsible for design review and also approving or rejecting the building permits. And thanks to this additional capacity provided by the private sector, it used to be 1,080 days in 1995 to issue the permit, but now in 2020, it reduced to 132 days. So this kind of unique approach can be also shared with the rest of the world to bolster the capacity of the implementation. This is a very quick summary of the findings, but now I would like to turn to Anna again for the conclusion.
Thanks very much, Keiko. So one important element that we want to highlight is that some of the development of these codes have been done independently. We need to have an harmonization of the building codes and make sure that the provisions that we are defining in the green buildings are consistent with the safety and resilience, for example, elements that are included in other codes. We cannot afford to have energy efficient buildings that will collapse in the next earthquake or in the next cyclone. In that sense, also, another key message is highlight the importance of going beyond life safety and controlling the damage in the not only on the structural elements, but in the non-structural elements to keep the functionality of the buildings, and especially on those critical buildings for emergency response and government response to go beyond the seismic and wind that has been the traditionally, and address all the challenges that are that buildings are facing generated by climate change in an integrated way with land use planning, of course. And one of the things and the bigger gaps was thinking that building codes were only for new buildings, just include the provisions for buildings to be able to be reused, retrofitted, and adapted to the new challenges and the new demands. Next, please. So as we advance in this process, and I know we are putting a high benchmark on trying to address a lot of things and trying to enhance the performance of the building codes, countries need to advance according with their capacity also to be able to implement compliance. We cannot have a very sophisticated code adopted or built on a very sophisticated economy in context where we don't have the capacity to implement it. So this has to be a progressive approach according with the capacities of the countries. And in that sense, although the benefits are clear from the saving lives and the economical point of view, I think it has to be adapted to the local capacities and local context. Next, please. So you will find in the report a summary for each of the countries that were analyzed. So, and in that sense, that can be an entry point for the conversation and the dialogue with the counterparts and the clients in case they want to start addressing some of the specific challenges in each of the countries. Next, please. You can download the publication through the QR code, and we invite you to go to our webpage where you can find a lot of other tools related with building regulations. We have created based on the best experiences globally. So checklist for resilience, for fire safety, for universal accessibility, and for green buildings that can be useful for countries and teams working on the development of building codes, or what are the critical parameters that can be included in the development of these documents. Next, please. But also, I would like to also to invite you to visit our webpage in GFDRR. We have specific provisions for safer and resilient schools, also resilient, green, and inclusive health facilities. So we are working not only on the building regulatory environment, but also on how to address the challenges of the built environment through specific sectors and specific elements. So thank you very much, and we look forward to the discussion.
Great. No, thank you, Ana and Keiko, for the overview. And I'm really pleased to see that the focus on capacity and enforcement, often in many countries, we see the building codes are in place, but it's really comes down to the actual implementation. So glad that you've got this very comprehensive view of all the different elements that go in, not only to the paper part, but actually the implementation, as well as the inclusive elements and the climate. So with that, we're running a bit behind, but we'll try and accelerate a bit. So now I'd like to give the floor to Maria Alejandra Escobar. Welcome. She's a disaster risk management specialist at the IDB, and is going to speak with us, zooming in a bit more on Latin America, on resilience and sustainability in building codes in Latin America and the Caribbean.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. And yes, I'm here on behalf of a big team that worked for many years also in the development of this publication. So I thank all of the team because that's the work that we are showing today. So I work in the new risk management special unit at the IDB. And some years ago, we prepared and published this document, Resilience and Sustainability in Building Codes in Latin America and the Caribbean. Next, please. So the first version in Spanish was published in 2023, and the translation to English in 2024. We work with regional experts from the Instituto de la Construcción in Chile, and the aim was to have a comparative analysis of how the building codes in the region were integrating resilience and sustainability provisions, and how we could assess the progress of these codes. Next, we wanted to assess the existence, the quality, legal nature, and level of compliance of the codes in three main areas: resilience, sustainability, and ratings or certificates for green buildings. So regarding resilience, we compare the national standards with international benchmarks with three main hazards: seismic, strong wind, and floods. On sustainability, based also on what Niels was talking about, giving the value more, the assets more value from the building codes. We wanted to see how the region was integrating into the codes the specific provisions related to energy and water efficiency, indoor environment quality, and climate zoning, and also to give like more of this market approach to see how the industry was taking advantage of the ratings or certificates, both how international ratings like LEED and EDGE were already integrated in the projects in the region, and how the countries were already developing their own tools and incentives to see exactly how the concentration of these ratings were already in the region in place. Next. So the methodology was quite similar to the global assessment that Anna just told us about. We did a literature review, we did consultations with the national agencies, and to dig deeper on some of the aspects that call our attentions, we did interview with the regional experts to later complete a comparative analysis for the 26 IDB borrowing countries in the Latin America and the Caribbean region. We ended the publication with some conclusions and recommendations to highlight the good practices and also identify potential opportunities to strengthen the codes in the region. Next. So here are some of the results. As Anna mentioned before, Latin America is a really high-prone area for a seismic hazard. So the advances and progress are very well identified. The region has a lot of good provisions in their building codes. Some of the, we assessed 14 parameters here comparing to the benchmarks. And we agree with the results that Anna just said. We need to include the non-structural components on enhance the provisions for that. And also, as Keiko was mentioning, all the provisions regarding reinforcement and repairs after event occurs are some of the aspects that are lacking in the regulations. And here we highlight Paraguay and Uruguay. Their exposure to seismic hazard is very low, so they don't have codes regarding this. For wind loads, we compared 7 parameters, and we highlight that the codes may benefit to include alternative analysis methods and to see exactly how more frequent storms may affect the wind loads that the countries are already identified. And for flooding, we also assess 7 parameters, and we highlight the importance of integrating these considerations into the design of the buildings, update the hazard maps, because those are the main inputs for the building codes, and also relate with the urban planning instruments, as Kik was saying. Land use zoning is also a good instrument to reduce the damage and losses from floods. And we here highlight the progress from Colombia and Costa Rica in integrating these provisions in their codes. For sustainability, we assess 76 codes and 126 technical standards. We concluded that 36% of them are mandatory, so it's a really low percentage. The main aspects of these standards is like they're voluntary and not mandatory. From the 39 parameters that we assessed, we identified that the standards are mainly focused on energy efficiency. So these can be improved by including more actions regarding water efficiency, clean materials, and other incentives. Also, it was like identified that maybe differentiating these sustainability codes by geographic zonation can also incentivize the use, because sometimes they are limited regarding the context of some geographies and can be difficult to achieve in other geographies. And lastly, regarding certifications, we know that international certifications such as LEED and EDGE are already being used in the region. We at IDB also encourage the use of these certification ratings for both the private and public sector. But we also identified 10 national certifications and 13 ratings that were already developed by the countries, both for the use of public and private sectors. And some of them include resilience provisions too. And as Kik was saying, those are mainly voluntary and not mandatory, but are sending the message to the market of the importance of having these incentives within the standards of the country. So some general strengthening opportunities and recommendations. We want to promote knowledge and the correct application of the regulations as capacity buildings. We encourage the participation of multiple stakeholders in the processes of updating and implementing the building codes, including the private sector and the academia. It's always important to allocate both financial and human resources for these actions. And we encourage also the use of robust methodologies for hazard and risk identification. This is where our initiative of the Risk Hub is going to be really useful for the region, because we want this to be a platform in which the countries have access to probabilistic platforms or tools to assess their own risk. And we want this to be like a one-stop shop of risk information. And we are working on it right now, also with a big focus on capacity training and building, sorry. And this like assessment, let us identify some good practices and lessons learned. So we want to promote the collaboration among the countries to exactly see what can be replicated in other regions, or well, within the same region in other countries, to develop and update the building codes, but also to integrate the sustainability provisions within the codes and extend the scope of the certifications. Next. And I wanted to share here with you one of the projects that we are doing already at the IDB. We are supporting El Salvador in the processes to update their building codes. As you know, well, this is a really high prone area for earthquakes. And the authorities already know that they need to update the national building regulations, including the technical standards for earthquake design that were published in 1997. As Keiko highlight, their risk map or the hazard map needed also an update. So the IDB, we gave technical financial support to prepare all the information in order to update the code. So we start with the component of understanding the seismic hazard, thus gathering local data on seismic hazard with evaluation of soil quality and site amplification effects, yes. So we can have a new seismic hazard map, very detailed also. Regarding vulnerability, the project included a component to develop fragility and vulnerability curves to produce the risk maps. And this taking into consideration the context of this country to make sure that these curves were developed for the typical construction materials used in the country. And also, we wanted to give some support on the governance of the of this process, not just the technical part. So the team also worked on the formulation of the action plan to give to the government institutions for updating the seismic standards. And following the example also from Colombia, the team suggested the creation of the permanent technical commission that will be responsible for future updates with active participation of the private sector and the academia. The code is close to be approved by the Congress, hopefully really soon. But right now, all the information produced in the project and many other information regarding risk data is published and available in the Ministry of Environment website. So we also wanted to have a big component of communication and dissemination of this information for all other users on research and all multiple stakeholders' interests. And as we support the countries in these efforts to update their building codes, for example, we are concluding also the process with the Bahamas in the social infrastructures group at the IDB. We are also publishing many guidelines to integrate resilience in infrastructure projects, including critical infrastructures such as schools and hospitals, but also on the different stages of the project, the design, the construction, and supervision of civil works, and how to integrate technology and deal with accessibility criteria. So these publications are available to download. I'm sharing the QR codes and the links of each of them, and they are in Spanish and English, and some of them are in Portuguese too. And we did a full series related to the Caribbean and how to build a resilient and low carbon environment there. So we took topics regarding building materials, financing, nature-based solutions, and decarbonization pathways on this region too. So I invite you to go and check this information. It's really interesting in this really complex context too. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Alejandra. Great. And what I also like a lot is all the different tools you have and the entry points you sort of created and work you're doing with different countries that complements well. I think there are a lot of synergies also with the work that Ana, Keiko, and the World Bank are doing that we can sort of further collaborate, especially in the region. So with that, so we've heard about these reports, and now the idea is we're going to have a bit of perspective from various experts, a panel discussion. I promise no more PowerPointing at you. We're gonna just have an open discussion with a few colleagues. And I'd like everybody who's online to please turn on your camera. There you are. So just to introduce, please wave. We have Francisca Pedraza. There you are. President of the Chilean Association of Structural Civil Engineers in Chile. Hola, hello.
Hello, good
We
morning.
also, good morning. We also have Luis Enrique Aicardi Fonseca, who's Assistant Professor of Civil Engineering at the Colombian School of Engineering, Julio Garavito in Colombia. Hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
Great, thank you for joining. And then here in the room, we have Paola Restrepo Caraví, who's the lead urban specialist here at the World Bank in the Latin America and Caribbean region. Hola, Paola. Okay. So what I'm going to do is we'll go around and I'll ask each of you a question to start, and we'll see how many rounds of discussion we have, and feel free also to comment on one another's responses if you want to add something. And again, a reminder to those participating online, we will save some time at the end for questions to our speakers and the panel. So please put any questions you may have in the chat and we'll come to that. So actually I'd like to start with Francisca, if that's okay. We'll begin with you. And so I want to hear a little bit more, and we've been talking about the collaboration on this work between the IDB and the World Bank. And your team worked with the IDB on the work Maria Alejandra presented on resilience and sustainability and building codes in Latin America and the Caribbean, and on the global report that we're launching today here from the World Bank side. So just from your side, based on your experience, what factors contribute to the advanced status of building codes in Latin America and the Caribbean countries compared to others globally, other peer countries? And what lessons do you think that the Latin America region can offer to others? And I feel like we had some hints from the presentations earlier. It's great to hear your views.
Yeah. Well, I prefer speaking Spanish. It's okay,
Sure.
or it's you prefer my English, and ask you some words maybe in the process.
However, we prefer English. Oh, okay. We prefer English if that's okay.
Okay, and don't worry.
Translation.
Okay, because we don't have translation in our room. That's the thing. Is that the issue?
That's the room. Yeah.
So if you don't
Okay,
mind,
don't
that
worry.
would. Anyway,
No,
your English sounds perfect. I don't think you have a
I want
problem.
to thank you. Sorry?
No, I said your English sounds perfect, so I don't think you'll have a problem.
Thank you. Well, the first thing I want to thank you, IDB, for the experience of the first job. I think Maria Alejandra, Ginés, and all the group of people, and the same with the World Bank professional, was incredible experience. The people are very commitment with the improvement of the Latin American countries in all ways, not only on codes. And this is very enthusiastic for any professional to work, and it's something to add to any group of collaboration we made in the future for each country. In this way, the things we saw in the first work, because we go further in the governance, how the government work with the people, and the independence of each country. It sounds like something very far away, but in some countries it's not so far away. And it's related with the level of codes they form in general. We saw some countries who was colony made their own codes few years ago. And these things is very important because in some point, the development of each country, it's a very important concept to understand how they grow into the codes, into their needs, the hazard of each country related with the reality of the codes. Yeah. I think this is a very important thing to get into the process and understand the hazard and the risk of any different parts of Latin America. It's a hard work we're making now recently, I think. We use the international codes, ABC in general. For Latin America is our best guide. And in that concept, understand how to take the best part of the development of codes and laws in other countries, but have the best information for each hazard and each country is a very important concept.
Great, thank you. So maybe now, Luis Enrique, if we can move to you. So it would be great to hear, we heard about Colombia, I didn't count, but many times Colombia came up in both presentations and all of the progress that's been achieved on building code standards. So it would be great if you could tell us a bit about the evolution of code development and some of the major milestones that have shaped Colombia's advanced building codes.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here. And I hope my English is not that bad. As you mentioned, I'm very glad to hear that the Colombian code is very well qualified and it got some good grades in this evaluation. I think, as Francesca said, every country it's quite different, and the development of the code in Colombia has been a very particular. It has followed a very particular history. Before 1984, we didn't have an official code in Colombia. We followed mainly the U.S. codes for the design of concrete and steel structures, but the main concern was the earthquake resistance, and so 1983 we had a very strong earthquake in the west part of the country, and that triggered the necessity to have a Colombian code. A few years before that was founded the Colombian Association of Earthquake Studies. So those people at that time, most of them professors at the universities and some of them structural designers, they had been translating some documents and sharing documents, and so that was the base for the first edition of the Colombian Code in 1984, and the idea at that time was to have it as a law which is particular in I believe in the world, because when we talk about codes, we are talking about technical documents, and we would like that to be recommendations and not something that has to be enforced by law. In Colombia, we followed that trend in 1984, and it was by a law that starting at that time, we had to follow that recommendations. It has advantages and disadvantages. I think it was very good because people had to do it, and that's in countries where we have some discipline issues that works very well. However, to have adjustments, to have updates of the code, it was very terrible to have to go to the Congress, to have to go to political procedures to get some updates. So we, after 14 years, in 1998, we were able to have a new code. And as somebody mentioned in the presentations, it was through the Congress that we, starting in 1997, we had a commission that it's composed by the government, some representation of the government, but some private associations. And now we have a procedure to update technically the document. It has to go anyway to some legal procedures, and finally it has to be signed by the president of the country. So that's quite difficult. That makes things difficult sometimes, because of political issues. However, it has worked very well in the country, I believe. We have been able to update the code several times since 1998. Very small updates and a major update in 2010. And now we are ready for a new update. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we have some delays, but we have now a new document issued by the Colombian Earthquake Association, and it's under study by that commission, and we hope to have it signed by the president in a few months. Now we have a particular situation with the elections coming next year, so we don't know if that's going to cause some problems in this procedure. But I believe the Colombian way to customize the international codes and have our own code with the different materials that not everybody uses in some other countries, and so I believe that the code it's quite good, and the procedure to update it has been working in a proper way during the last 20 years. We'll see how things work in the next future.
Yes, we'll be thinking of you. Good luck. Hopefully it works out well. No, thanks for that intervention. So now we'll move to Paula. So Paula, as you're working at the regional level in Latin America and the Caribbean, you interact with many counterparts in the region, and it would be good to hear what you're seeing in terms of demands, opportunities for building code development, as well as implementation capacity development, and sort of what the World Bank is doing in these areas.
Yes, many thanks, Zoe and Anna and Keiko for inviting me. I think it's great to be here and hear all of what the region has been doing, how it has been advancing, getting this benchmark. I think it's really useful. I have been thinking on the building codes. I think it's very rare, that we sit with the Ministry of Urban Development or Ministry of Public Works or the Ministry of MEF, and tells us my priority is building codes. But often, that happens from time to time. Unfortunately, often after a disaster hits, that's when it comes to the table. But I think we have so many other demands and opportunities that are linked to the topic that we're talking about. And I wanted maybe to concentrate a little bit on those, because I think that's where we have a lot of opportunities to start working on some of the building blocks that you've been mentioning, from hazard maps to land use planning to actually doing the building codes to supporting local governments and some of the elements, for instance, on Colombia, on how they're using to actually comply and make sure there's compliance with the codes. So what are we seeing in the Latin American and Caribbean region in particular? We're seeing a lot of demands on support on housing. We are working with more than 13 countries in the region on a lot of different elements, from housing policy to supporting housing programs, to supporting the expansion in housing finance, which I think is critical to actually for this, because you can have, like in Colombia, the best building code, in Peru that has advanced a lot, but if 90% of your houses are built through self-built informal sector, then you're not being able not to really cover a lot of that. So I think our housing is really a lot of demand and opportunity for supporting on these building codes, but also making sure a lot of the new houses that are being constructed, they're being constructed in the formal sector, and that households, low-income households, middle-income households, are actually able to enter the formal market that follows building codes, if everything is working well. I think the other area that is very much linked to what Anna and Keiko were mentioning is creating also these small houses codes or guidelines. I think is essential for the way the region is urbanizing, and it also helps to have some guidelines. I think Mexico has advanced on this for housing improvements. That is, as the region is also moving to having a large, what we call qualitative deficit in the housing stock, where you don't need necessarily more and more houses as you do in Africa, but you need better houses. We really need to start paying a little bit more attention, and this is something that we're working with clients across the region on how to conduct those housing improvements and retrofits in a way that addresses multiple things in terms of comfort, resilience, but also in terms of green buildings. And it's something that we're learning together. It's a challenge, but I think where we can also have maybe some lessons learned in the future coming from Latin America. I think on the other sort of element that we have a lot of demand is obviously on disaster risk management in general. How do we support countries across the region from very upstream on disaster risk management policies and plans to disaster risk financing? And I think in most of the countries where we engage, that we have a lot of what we call CAT DDOs, we have a very good opportunity to support with reforms. What we've seen, and I would love to hear about it, these building codes takes a lot of time to get there. Sometimes 3 to 5 years to build consensus. You have academia, like Luis Enrique was mentioning. You also have cámaras de construcción, the private sector coming in and developers. You have the government. So how do you build that consensus together through long time to deliver the reforms and to also create those mechanisms to get that compliance happening? In the DR, we are, for instance, engaged very closely with them on the update of the building codes, and also they decided to go through basically updating parts of the building codes, because it was too complicated to just go with everything. So it has been a process little by little, and through different policy lending instruments, we're supporting different parts. So we're advancing. It will take time, but we're getting there. I think one element that I also wanted to mention is that we've seen through our engagement that this is not a one-off exercise. As Luis and Francisca were also mentioning, that there's a need to update and to get also a feedback from developers in particular. In the case of Peru, where we supported the sustainable building code, developers and basically the private sector came later and said, this is too stringent. So you're telling me, like to the quality and almost the color of the material, I need more flexibility. I can deliver in that case on energy efficiency and water standards, but these things and the technologies are changing too fast. No, so I need to move from very specific to more like a performance, like what Edge does. No, on this is what we're aiming in terms of energy consumption or water consumption, and let me as a developer try to get there through different solutions. No, so I think that feedback loop is quite important. I think through all the things. And I see the opportunity to really use all of these different entry points that we have, not only the post-disaster, which I think we still need to use because it's important to update building codes or to even construct them, but to use all of these entry points to help construct a better ecosystem. I think that's the biggest opportunity that I see, at least in LAC.
No, thank you. And I think it's interesting looking at buildings, the built environment, but then zooming in on housing, because private versus public, you have very different sort of incentives and ways, especially for families. Nobody wants to build a house that's not safe, or that, everybody wants to do the best possible, but this access to financing and resources sometimes can be a limitation, or the trade-off, right, between even understanding the cost benefit of building to these higher standards versus retrofitting later, or what the energy and water, all these savings you may get and accumulate over time, you may still have to invest a bit more upfront. So it's interesting. So before we can go around again for some more Q&A with the panel, but I don't know if
there's no questions yet.
There are no questions yet. You guys are very shy. I don't know in the room if anybody has.
I have a question.
Okay, not you yet. Yes, you can go.
I don't work with codes, but codes has been in my life. Yes, I'm a contractor and a financial management, and I also work in procurement. So the material of construction have changed immensely. And I also have seen that the codes, sometimes they're there, but nobody checking them in our documents. So I was going to ask you for the World Bank and the IDB, if you're checking when there is a building built, how the codes comply with the bid proposals. Because what I see is that the code say you need so many millimeters. And then I am not in construction, I say 3.2, and here they say 4.1. So I reject that, but that's not my job. That's we suppose somebody who really qualified to do that.
The construction supervision design.
I don't know if you understand the question that I'm saying.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Okay, but let's think on it. I'll give you a couple minutes and Niels can ask his question and then we'll go around.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, and I've asked my own team this a few times in maybe different ways. I'm wondering how much data we have on why it matters. No, I can see the academic interest in an improved code and the seismologist interest in applying the knowledge they have learned in the last decade. But why change the code? Do we know key parameters like country by country, how many new units are built annually, and of those units, how many would we or how many comply with the code? So can we generate a numerical understanding of what is the future relevance of yet another improvement to the coding structure? And could we, to me, this is two key data points. Certainly for us as a bank, I think these data points is what drives the kind of entry points that Paula was referring to, because it helps us see as technical specialists trade-offs, whether or not we should focus more of our excitement around the financing side, elevating the number of 10% to 20% that comply with code may have a larger risk reduction value than improving the code that is informing only the 10%. So having some of these numbers, I think, would be very powerful and powerful for us as a bank. We could, in theory, structure performance-based financing flows around structures where we are improving on the attainment of these kind of numbers or the objectives we could wrap around them. But I haven't seen these numbers generally. I've asked my team if we can generate them country by country. I imagine maybe in some countries it's part of the internal political process of arguing why we need an update, because it gives us data for the relevance.
there was an exercise, even if it was very, I don't want to say quick and dirty, but we did it with the resources that we had at hand in Peru, in which we were discussing with MEF in terms of how they can do climate mitigation and adaptation measures with the same amount of money, with the public expenditures, not to increase. How do you spend in a better way, in a way that reduces, for instance, exposure to hazards. And we looked at if the city could grow in a different way, how you would save money in terms of, so there's the avoided losses part, which I think is quite important. I think that can clearly be done. On the housing side, we're looking at how many housing units you need to construct. So you can also model in terms of how much of those are constructed with different techniques, either the building code or and then you have to do a probabilistic assessment, and I guess as we usually do. I think it is. I do feel like on the green buildings, that's a critical part of the discussion that we're having, or when we go to EDGE, or when we discuss of incorporating green building standards, because they're still seen as something that is optional. No, so there the cost is a critical part, of the discussion. I think on the resilience part, it is also an important side. That was,
Yeah.
Luis
Enrique,
do
you want to comment?
Yeah.
Yes, I believe that's a great issue. The question of if it is really important to update the codes very frequently, and it's very important to have a new code. Of course, when we suffer earthquakes and floods and everything, we learned about that, because most of the natural hazards are different every time. Every time it happens something, it's going to add some information that is very helpful for new research and for new updates. However, in Colombia, and I believe in the world, we have proved in Colombia after 1984, the buildings that were designed and built following the code they have behaved very, very well under new earthquakes and floods and whatever. So of course we would like to improve the codes. We would like to adjust some particular details, but in Colombia, and I believe in most of Latin America, as Paula was saying, the informal housing, that's the main issue. And as you were saying, it would be very, very helpful to have some numbers about how many, what's the percentage of the construction in Latin America and in some other places in the world that are not compliant with codes because they are not legal constructions. Here in Colombia, if you have a license, it's very, very probable that the building is going to behave very well. And we have worked a lot in the technical supervision of the designs, the technical supervision of the construction, and the results are very good in those legal constructions. But the informal construction, the people who just build their own houses with their own hands, with the help of the neighbors, and that's a big issue in Latin America, especially in Colombia. We know it very well since a long time ago, and we have worked in trying to the main problem is the political issues. It's not for a politician. It's not. It doesn't make any sense to invest in And in those kind of procedures, because that's not going to get any votes in an election. And so it's very sad to not do anything about it. In the past few years, we have done some write some simplified provisions, some guidelines. We have worked with the organizations like Bill Change to improve the status of those houses, and it's only starting that process in Colombia. But I believe that's a main issue that has to be addressed nationally and internationally, because we haven't done enough. And to have a great code, it's not a sign of good implementation in the country. So we have to work a lot in the implementation, in guidelines, and in education of people. But that basic education, that's civic education. We don't need to have lots of masters and PhDs. I believe we need to have people informed and educated about the risks that they are exposing themselves and their families, and that's a great. We have to do a great effort in that direction. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense to have beautiful codes.
No, exactly.
Yes.
No, thank you. I agree 100. And again, I think nobody wants to live in a flood-prone area. Nobody wants to have a poorly constructed house, but it's whatever land that they have access to, the affordability. I know we have another, so I don't know if anybody wants to comment from the IDB or the bank on the question here. We have a question online from Robin, and I think you also had a question.
I just wanted to answer very quickly. That's why we have been creating this code awareness externally and within the bank, because we go to a country to finance an investment, and we all assume that the government has a good code, and the terms of reference say that they have to follow the local regulations. But if we create the awareness that there is gaps in those regulations, we will have better standards in what we are trying to finance. And we are not only trying to influence what the banks finance, but also beyond what others are financing.
What he's saying, because what is the incentive to really follow the code? And it happened here also in the United States. The state of Maryland has different subsidiary, and everybody has a different code. And I will tell you, the person who earn more money are the contractor who are not licensed.
Okay. Well, that's
but I'm sorry, I didn't want to desviate.
Yeah. No, so it's a good point, though, definitely. Okay. And then real quick, and then we have one online.
Very quickly, so I'm Jayshree Srinivasan. I work with the Business Ready Project, also the lead author of the Unlocking Efficiency report on energy efficiency. So very quickly, I've already spoken to Anna and Keiko and team about this, but in Business Ready, we are producing a lot of indicators related to building codes on the regulatory side and public services. So availability of codes, what are their provisions, things like, who's responsible for compliance with legal requirements, and inspections and so on and so forth. So this data for round 2 of Business Ready will be available late fall for 102 countries. And then we ramp up next year to 160 countries. So, and then it's an annual report and a whole bunch of indicators around building codes and construction quality. And the binary data, so this is not like we're not delving deep. It's just yes, no, is it available or not, and public services, how good they are, and then efficiency overall. But a very useful entry point in the sense that if our hope is that Business Ready gets as popular as doing business, so and then then there is government interest in wanting to do something more in improving the building regulatory side. So, yes. And one very quick thing also to answer Neil's question, sorry. We've also been struggling finding, sources of data on how to look at, the why behind, how one thing we've seen as a proxy of, availability of, is there, publicly available data on how many building codes have been issued in, in country or city. And then, we see what is the data available on new buildings and then see what, there's some kind of proxies can be used. Country by country. It's hard.
Okay, so one last question. I think we have 4 minutes left, and this is from online, from Robin. So the question is to the research team, but I think it can also go to both of research team. In terms of, it goes back to Paola's point on self-production and the tension with affordability and the tendency for the poor to build without mortgages. And so by extension, there's less regulatory oversight because of no insurance and no underwriting. So were there any case studies or any sort of particular examples that you saw? Or did you look into this at all, or that might be a future area for more engagement?
No, we didn't have any particular case study, but that's why we have been promoting the housing guidance notes, the training of technicians, connecting this with the financing and the example of what Colombia is doing, because Colombia has subsidies for new housing, for affordable housing, and for the enhancement or the retrofitting of existing housing. And one of the discussions is you cannot add one floor if you're not looking at the resilience of the building. So in that way, so there were some conditions on those subsidies on how that can be applied. No, so I think it's connecting the knowledge with the financing and with developing the capacity of the different stakeholders. And it's connected with the insurance when you get a credit officially. So in that sense, I think that's one of the suggestions.
Yeah, and Keiko has her hand up, but probably many of these are not insurable, right? So
Yeah,
many
exactly.
of these houses are not well built, so you would never be able to.
Many
get
don't have
insurance.
proper titles.
They don't have titles
Yeah,
even, so it's just like they're kind of flying under the radar, but with a high exposure that then if something happens, the government usually would then have to come in and
We have to
support.
come in
So
and
it's a
support.
big contingent liability sitting there,
It is.
even though it's a private asset. Keiko, rapidito, if you want to come in and then.
Yeah, very quickly. Yeah, no, I think this is a great question, and I think this is very practical, like a struggle that we all have. But I think if we think about the post-disaster reconstruction, there is a kind of mechanism, kind of approach that the bank has been using, conditional cash transfer, and use the building, housing guideline as a condition, for people to follow. And they're like people going to, check the quality or check the compliance level. And then, people will get a tranche of the money, stage by stage. So similar kind of approach can be, of course, taken in the reconstruction stage or kind of regular stage where there's no constraint, and then that there is opportunity for kind of inviting insurance company, because if for example, Japan actually had a similar case after the war. There were a kind of huge demand of the housing reconstruction, and then there was no collateral for the people, but as long as people get the funding from the government owned housing financing agency, they had to follow very strict housing guideline. And then because of the compliance to that very strict guidelines, the private sector banks started to feel like these houses are good quality and therefore have the good collateral value. So the additional money started to flow into those kind of good quality houses. So there could be kind of combination of lesson learned from the post-disaster reconstruction approach to kind of regular type of housing construction, I think.
Yeah, no, and there are many different types of post-disaster reconstruction. Some homeowner driven, others sort of government led with developers in coordination with homeowners. Lots of pros and cons. But we're at time. And so I really want to thank all of our presenters, our speakers, everyone for joining, for your participation. Clearly, this is a really interesting topic that links to many other development issues. And I think it would be great to continue the conversation. We encourage you again, to look at both the IDB report as well as our new report that was just launched. And I believe the link is in the chat. So please take a look, download, use it in your discussions with colleagues, with counterparts. And please be in touch. We will circulate, as I mentioned, this has been recorded. We've also, I believe we'll circulate the PowerPoints too.
And the video, yeah,
The what?
that they are gonna be in the video. Like they're
And the
recording.
video, yes, so they'll also be in the video. So anyway, thanks again to everyone. Let's keep the discussion going, and good luck to Luis Enrique in Colombia with the new code. We'll be
Thank
thinking
you.
of you.
Thanks a lot.
Yes. Take care. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.